And then Alex, do you want to talk about this idea of do no harm?
Yeah, this is something I've seen unfortunately a good amount of times, but like, it kind of makes sense because it's like if you're following the concept of breaking down your diffs, like let's say you're building a feature and it needs 2,500 lines of code in order to be complete, and then you probably split it up into something like 20 25 diffs with like 100 lines of code each, and something so they already have this good instinct of breaking up the diffs in mind, but then I've seen people exploit it where since these diffs are broken up, like this diff on its own will like set up some infrastructure, but it's like very half-baked infrastructure. So it'll actually make the app worse before like unless the diffs on top of it in the stack are landed. A very common thing I've seen is like you're building a feature and then how it works at Facebook is you will land unfinished features in production, but then you have these server-side flags called gatekeepers that essentially keep them off. So all the code is in the app, but then there's essentially like a Boolean flag that prevents it from being shown to the user. So the user doesn't even realize that it's there. And then when all the code is landed and you're ready to launch your feature, then you just flip on the flag to true and then people can see it. So a mistake I've seen is like people will just land like this new screen and then users can see it, and then the diff on top of it will add the gating. So they're like, oh yeah, well, don't worry, I'm going to land these two together so that like, yeah, yes, diff A on its own is bad, but then I'm only going to land it alongside diff B. And that's how they kind of rationalize it. But there's a very tactical problem here, which is let's say diff B ends up causing a sev, like it ends up being bad. Generally, like what happens if there's a big production issue, and you realize that this particular diff is causing that fire, they will just roll back the diff. They'll essentially uncommit that from the code base. And if you have this A dependent on B scenario and then B gets rolled back, now A is essentially causing an issue because it needed B in order to survive and like not hurt the code base. So this do no harm concept is actually in the official Facebook code review guidelines because again, it's something that people do more more than they should, which is zero. So when you're writing any diff, make sure that this diff on its own doesn't break anything and improves the code base on its own in some way.
And a related note here is that if you're touching a shared piece of infrastructure, you should be really careful about making sure that you're not inadvertently breaking another team that you may not even know about. And so what will typically happen here is like at Facebook, you have these really core pieces of infra that like 10 or 20 teams depend on. And so what you should, even if like there might be like, for example, an app, I have no idea even if this app existed or if it does exist, like how do I install it and test it? It'll take me like a week to even set up that app. And so typically what I'll do in that case is I will just reach out to uh, a coworker or a tech lead on that team and say, hey, I'm making this change. I know it might actually have an impact for you. Would you mind taking a look at it or letting me know how I can test the change for you? Because this idea of do no harm is so critical. And in a large elephant, if you have this large code base, which is this big elephant, you want to make sure that you touching the elephant here doesn't inadvertently cause some harm to the elephant somewhere else.